Good evening, and welcome to Sleep Sanctuary, where calmness and imagination meet to guide you into a restful sleep. Close your eyes, if you'd like, and settle into the stillness of this moment. Tonight, let me take you on a journey, not across vast lands or distant seas, but one that leads deep into the heart. It began on an unassuming evening. Rain tapped softly on cobblestones as I wandered down a quiet street, my umbrella shielding me from the drizzle. A dimly lit antique shop caught my eye, its sign creaking gently in the breeze. Something about it felt out of time, as if it existed only for those meant to find it. Inside, the air smelled of aged wood and forgotten stories. Shelves brimming with trinkets and treasures seemed to hum with quiet energy. Among them, an old compass caught my attention. Its bronze surface was worn, etched with intricate designs, and the needle shimmered faintly under the flickering light. The shopkeeper, an older man with a knowing smile, offered no explanation, only a cryptic, "It'll take you where you need to go." Curiosity outweighed caution, and I left with the compass in hand. That night, as I turned it over in my palm, I noticed something strange. The needle didn't point north. It pointed somewhere else entirely. Before we continue the journey, let's take a moment to rest. This is your time to let go of the day and find stillness within yourself. Begin by settling into a comfortable position. Allow your body to sink into the surface beneath you, feeling the gentle support it offers. Close your eyes, if you haven't already, and take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for a moment. Then, let it out slowly, as if you're releasing a weight you've been carrying. Now, take another deep breath. As you inhale, imagine drawing in a calming light, a warm glow that begins to spread through your body. Exhale gently, letting go of any lingering tension. Feel your shoulders soften, your jaw unclench, and your hands relax. Picture yourself standing in a quiet space, perhaps a serene forest or a still meadow under the moonlight. The air is cool and refreshing, and a soft breeze brushes against your skin. You hear the faint rustling of leaves and the gentle murmur of distant water. This is your sanctuary, a place where time slows and the noise of the world fades away. As you breathe deeply, imagine the compass resting in your hand, its smooth surface warm to the touch. Its needle glimmers faintly, but it does not demand your attention yet. For now, you are simply here, present and calm, preparing for the journey ahead. Let yourself linger in this moment. With each breath, feel more grounded, more connected to the quiet strength within you. When you're ready, we'll move forward, one step at a time, trusting the path the compass will reveal. But for now, Simply breathe. There is no rush, only peace. The next morning, the compass stirred to life, its needle steady and resolute, pointing toward the east. A quiet curiosity grew within me as I packed a small bag and followed its guidance. The path it traced was familiar, though I hadn't walked it in years. It wasn't long before I realized where it was leading me, back to my childhood home. I arrived to find the house much smaller than I'd remembered, the yard overgrown, but the memories it held seemed to seep from its walls. I could almost hear the echo of laughter from days long past, the sound of my younger self chasing fireflies under the summer sky. The compass urged me further, guiding me to an old park just down the road. The swing set, rusted and worn, stood like a sentinel of forgotten joys. I sat on one of the swings and let it creak beneath my weight. It was here that I first dreamed of the impossible, where I felt free and invincible. But those dreams had been buried under the demands of adulthood, forgotten and left to fade. As I sat, a memory surfaced, a day spent sketching beneath the oak tree, a drawing of a soaring bird that my young hands had lovingly crafted. I followed the compass's pull toward that very tree, its roots gnarled and sprawling, and there, half buried beneath the leaves, I found it. A weathered tin box. Inside was the drawing, edges frayed and colors faded, yet it still carried the boldness of my childhood imagination. Holding it, I felt a pang of loss, but also a spark of something else, a longing to reconnect with the dreams I'd once held so dearly. The compass hadn't led me to a place, it had led me to a forgotten part of myself. The compass pointed west now, its needle unwavering as I continued to follow it. I had no idea where it was leading me, but I felt compelled to trust its silent guidance. Days passed as I traveled through quiet towns and open landscapes, the journey slow but oddly comforting. Finally, the needle brought me to a place I hadn't expected, a small coffee shop in a town I'd only visited once, years ago. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods enveloped me. The chatter of customers and the soft hum of background music filled the air, grounding me in the present. But then, I saw them, sitting at a corner table, their face partially hidden behind a book. My heart stopped for a moment. It was Olivia, my closest childhood friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. We had drifted apart after a bitter argument in our early 20s, both too stubborn to reconcile. Yet here they were, as though the compass had orchestrated this meeting. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I should leave before they noticed me. But then the compass, still warm in my pocket, seemed to urge me forward. "Olivia?" I said softly, my voice trembling with both uncertainty and hope. They looked up, their eyes widening in surprise. "I don't believe it," they said, standing quickly. "It's been so long." We embraced awkwardly at first, the years of silence between us palpable. But as we sat down and began to talk, the old familiarity resurfaced. It was as though the years had melted away. We reminisced about our childhood adventures, the countless hours spent dreaming about the future, and even the silly fights that had seemed so important back then. Eventually, the conversation turned to our falling out. The memory of it had weighed on me for years, a knot of regret I hadn't been able to untangle. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I should have reached out sooner." Olivia smiled sadly. "I've missed you," they replied. "And I'm sorry too." We were both young and stubborn. But it's never too late to start again. The conversation that followed was healing, like a balm on an old wound I hadn't realized was still raw. We laughed, cried, and talked late into the evening. By the time we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of closure. As I stepped back outside, the compass felt different in my pocket. Its needle had already shifted, pointing me toward the next destination. But this time, I wasn't filled with uncertainty. Instead, I felt a deep gratitude for the journey it had brought me on so far. The compass wasn't just guiding me to places, it was leading me back to the people and pieces of myself that I had lost along the way. The compass was relentless, its needle pulling me forward as though it couldn't wait to show me what was next. This time, it led me to a city I hadn't visited in years, bustling and alive with energy. Yet amidst the noise and movement, the compass guided me down a quiet street and stopped at the door of a small art studio. The sign above read "Open Studio," and through the windows, I could see walls adorned with paintings and sculptures, the scent of paint and turpentine faintly wafting through the air. I hesitated for a moment, unsure why I was here, but the compass seemed insistent. I stepped inside. The studio was warm and inviting, filled with artists of all ages working on their projects. Brushes danced across canvases, hands shaped clay with delicate precision, and the sound of quiet focus filled the space. As I wandered through the room, memories began to surface of hours spent sketching as a child, of the joy I once felt creating something from nothing. An older woman, perhaps the instructor, approached me with a kind smile. Looking for a place to create, she asked. I started to shake my head, ready to explain that I wasn't an artist, but the compass in my pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, as if nudging me forward. "I used to draw," I admitted hesitantly. Her smile widened. "Then you're exactly where you need to be. Why don't you give it a try?" She gestured to an empty easel and set of paints. For a moment, I froze. It had been so long since I'd picked up a brush or even thought about creating art. But as I sat down, something stirred within me, a flicker of the passion I'd abandoned years ago. I dipped the brush into the paint, the vibrant colors spreading across the canvas like a long-forgotten language returning to me. At first, I was clumsy, unsure of myself, but as the minutes passed, the hesitation melted away. The strokes became freer, the colors brighter, and with each movement, I felt more alive. It wasn't just about the painting, it was about reconnecting with a part of myself I had neglected for far too long. Somewhere along the way, life had become about responsibilities, schedules, and practicality. Art, once my escape and my joy, had been pushed aside. When I stepped back to look at the finished piece, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was mine, a reflection of who I was and who I could be again. As I left the studio that evening, the compass felt lighter in my pocket, its needle already shifting toward the next destination. But this time, I wasn't just following it, I was carrying with me the spark of a forgotten passion reignited, a reminder that it's never too late to reclaim what once made us feel alive. The compass, which had been so steadfast in its guidance, now seemed hesitant. Its needle spun slowly in circles, refusing to settle on a clear direction. Days passed, and no matter where I went or how patiently I waited, the compass offered no clarity. At first, I thought it was broken. I tapped it lightly, held it under the light, and even turned it over in my hands, searching for answers. But nothing changed. Frustration began to creep in, and doubt followed close behind. Had I imagined its purpose? Was it just a coincidence that it had led me to those meaningful moments? I spent hours replaying the journey in my mind, questioning everything. The antique shop, the childhood memory, the reconciliation, the rediscovered passion, had I given them too much meaning? Perhaps the compass wasn't magical at all, and I had been foolish to believe it could guide me. The uncertainty weighed on me like a heavy fog. Without the compass to direct me, I felt lost, not just in the physical sense, but deep within myself. For the first time in weeks, I stopped moving forward. I stayed in a small, nondescript motel, unsure of what to do next. In the stillness, my thoughts became louder. Doubts I had pushed aside for years surfaced, fears of failure, regrets about paths not taken, and the lingering question of whether I was enough. The compass had brought me face to face with unresolved feelings, but now, with no direction to follow, I was left to confront the doubt within myself. One night, as I sat by the motel window watching the stars, I realized something. The compass had never promised to lead me anywhere specific. It hadn't spoken or explained itself, it simply pointed, leaving the rest to me. Perhaps this moment of stillness, this uncomfortable confrontation with my doubts, was part of the journey too. I pulled the compass from my pocket, its smooth surface cool against my palm. Closing my eyes, I let out a deep breath and stopped asking it for answers. Instead, I asked myself, what do I want? What am I searching for? The answers didn't come right away, but a sense of calm began to settle over me. The compass wasn't broken, it was teaching me something I had long forgotten, how to trust my own instincts. It had guided me when I needed direction, but now it was giving me the space to reflect, to pause, and to decide for myself. The next morning, as I packed my things, I glanced at the compass one last time before slipping it into my pocket. The needle had stopped spinning. It pointed steadily, firmly, as if it had been waiting for me to find clarity within myself. I didn't know where it would lead me next, but for the first time, I felt ready to follow, not out of desperation, but with a quiet confidence born from confronting my own doubts. The compass was certain again, its needle pointing with quiet determination toward a new destination. I followed it without hesitation, though I could feel that this journey was different. There was no rush, no urgency, just a steady sense of purpose, as though the compass and I were finally in sync. It led me out of the city, past sprawling fields and winding country roads, until the terrain grew wilder. Trees closed in around me, their canopies forming a green cathedral that filtered the sunlight into soft, golden streams. The air smelled of earth and pine, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the crunch of my footsteps on the forest floor. After hours of walking, the trees parted, and I found myself standing on the edge of a serene lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky above like a mirror. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow, and the setting sun painted the scene in hues of gold and lavender. I pulled the compass from my pocket, expecting its needle to point further ahead, but it didn't. For the first time, the needle stopped moving entirely, as though it had reached its final destination. I stared at it, waiting for some sign, but the compass was silent. It didn't need to tell me anything else. I sat by the water's edge, letting the stillness wash over me. This wasn't the kind of destination I'd imagined. It wasn't a person, a place from my past, or even a clear answer to my questions. It was simply a space to be, to reflect, and to exist without expectation. As I sat there, memories from the journey unfolded in my mind like pages from a book. The laughter of childhood, the warmth of reconciliation, the joy of rediscovering art, and even the doubts I'd wrestled with, it all led me here, to this quiet, unassuming moment of peace. And then I realized the compass hadn't been leading me to a physical location at all. It had guided me to the parts of myself I'd lost or forgotten. It brought me back to my past, to heal old wounds, and to my passions, to reignite the fire within. It showed me that home wasn't a place, it was the feeling of being whole, of accepting myself as I was. The weight I'd been carrying for years seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of clarity. I didn't need the compass anymore. I was already where I needed to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I placed the compass gently on a rock by the lake. It had served its purpose, and I was grateful. Standing up, I took one last deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt ready to walk it on my own. As I left the compass behind, a part of me wondered if I would feel lost without it. For so long, it had been my guide, leading me through tangled emotions, forgotten memories, and moments of doubt. But as I walked away from the lake and back into the world, I realized something. The compass had done more than point me in the right direction. It had taught me to listen to myself. The journey home was unhurried. Each step felt lighter, my mind clearer than it had been in years. The questions that had once haunted me, am I on the right path? Am I enough? No longer carried the same weight. They hadn't disappeared, but they no longer demanded answers. I had come to understand that some questions are meant to be lived with, not solved. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything the compass had shown me. Reconnecting with my childhood reminded me of the simple joys I'd forgotten, of dreaming without limits and finding wonder in the smallest things. Reuniting with Olivia had healed a wound I hadn't realized was still open, teaching me that it's never too late to mend what's broken. And rediscovering art had rekindled a passion that brought color and meaning back into my life. But perhaps the most profound lesson came during the detour into doubt. In those moments of uncertainty, when the compass seemed to falter, I learned to sit with my discomfort and trust myself. The compass hadn't abandoned me, it had simply given me space to find my own way. Now, without the compass, I felt no urgency to seek the next destination. Instead, I allowed myself to savor the present. Mornings became a time for quiet reflection, afternoons for exploring new creative outlets, and evenings for reconnecting with friends and family. My life wasn't perfect, but it felt whole. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that the compass had led me to something I hadn't expected: peace. Not the fleeting kind that comes from solving a problem or reaching a goal, but a deeper peace, the kind that comes from knowing and accepting yourself. I thought back to the shopkeeper's words when he handed me the compass: "It'll take you where you need to go." He hadn't been referring to a place. He had known, somehow, that the journey wasn't about finding a destination but about rediscovering myself. The compass had brought me home, not to a house or a town, but to the core of who I was. And as I sat there, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, I knew I would carry this sense of home within me, no matter where life led me next. The journey wasn't about the compass, it was about learning to trust the quiet pull of my own heart. And now, I was finally at peace.